There. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Again, we're so glad you're here for today's session with Maria Rio. Again, I'm Cristina Munoz. Really excited for you to be here. This is session 2 of our fundraising series with Further Together. So we partnered this year to co-design a session specifically for fundraisers and specifically with the approach of community-centric fundraising, which centers collective care, social justice, and equity. We are so honored to have Maria, who's a powerhouse fundraiser with over a decade of experience. And today she's going to guide us through one of the most avoided and most important topics in fundraising, how to talk to donors about white supremacy, racism, and capitalism. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maria. Thank you so much for being here, Maria. We're so lucky to have you.
So thrilled to be here. I love this partnership that we've been able to build. And yes, thank you everyone for joining today. I know that this is not usual webinar material, but I think it's going to be really exciting. And I'm assuming that you do too. So great. Okay, so welcome to How to Talk to Donors About White Supremacy, Capitalism, Systemic racism, and wealth hoarding, which is a mouthful. We will cover a few different agenda items today. So what is white supremacy? Why should we talk about it? Why don't we? So like, what are the things that are holding us back from talking about it? How can we? And why does this approach work? Before we get into all of that, let me briefly introduce myself. So my name is Maria Rio. My pronouns are she and her. And I just like to give a little bit of background of who I am as a person so you can kind of maybe see yourself in the same lived experience. So I came to Canada as a refugee when I was 9 years old. I lived in a World Vision refugee shelter for 6 months when we got here. And then we started using a lot of charitable services. So food banks, drop-ins, Christmas gifts from strangers, that kind of stuff. So I've been on the receiving end of charitable services, and that really helped, help me understand how vital nonprofit services are, right? Once I was old enough to start fundraising, when I was 19, I started as a face-to-face fundraiser with a company called Public Outreach, reaching out to people on the street. There, I learned a lot about fundraising. Then I moved to work in-house, but we know a lot of the in-house stuff isn't exactly the way that we want it to go. That's why we're in this training, right? Like we want fundraising to be more of a form of advocacy. We want to be able to have those conversations, right? So in-house, I started writing op-eds, presenting at conferences, and started working to implement community-centric fundraising. Um, just for your information, I'll be using the term CCF as well interchangeably with the term community-centric fundraising. And basically what that means to me is having a fundraising approach that's rooted in the dignity, autonomy of service users, right? That's not exactly how all nonprofits run. So I started Further Together in 2023 and have been consulting ever since. And now I get to do amazing things like this with Christina and Alyssa at Further Together, sorry, Dr. Bronner's, right? So it's all really cool. And I want to tell you that because everything I teach and implement is designed to exponentially increase your impact, reach, funds, and capacity in a way aligned with your values, right? I know how important your work is. So now we can jump in. I want to introduce you to this fish. Is it thriving? Is it surviving? How's its environment? How does it see the world? It seems like a pretty good clean bowl right here or ocean. I don't know where it is, right? So just thinking through, like, what does this feel like to you? And then I want to introduce you to this fish. Is it thriving? Is it surviving? How's its environment? How does it see the world? You can see the ocean around it is like a little bit more polluted. It has, not like it's losing its color over here in comparison to the other fish, right? Why are we talking about fish? So this fish has advantages that makes its life easier, right? The water is cleaner, you can see far ahead, you can avoid predators, all that stuff, right? This fish has disadvantages that make its life harder, right? It's getting sick just being in that water. Neither fish chose its situation. There are just different conditions that impact them each. So some impacts are positive, like we see with our colorful fish, and some are negative, like we see with our kind of like sicker fish here, right? So we are the fish and white supremacy is the water, right? We didn't choose our situation and we, can't necessarily change the water just by thinking it ourselves, right? So what can we do? So the first part is understanding what is white privilege. Then we could talk about white supremacy, right? So white privilege is basically unearned advantages that white people get just because of the color of their skin, right? So it's not necessarily about being a good or a bad person. It's just how society is currently set up. So these advantages can include like access to better jobs, housing, education, and just being treated more positively day to day. So like not being followed in a store, things like that. This, if you're a white person, might be kind of invisible without actually trying to learn about it, right? It's kind of like asking this fish to notice water. It just feels very normal. Some things to know about white privilege is that, or any kind of privilege actually, is privilege isn't a choice. So you don't get to choose to acquire that privilege or give it away, whether it's white privilege or, uh, able-bodied or immigration, whatever it is, you can't choose to give it away. It's institutional, it's not personal. So privilege comes from systems like education, the legal system, job markets that favor, in this case, white people. Um, a lot of white people will feel not privileged because they don't necessarily feel powerful in society, but the privilege is in the systems working for you without you having to think about it, right? So it's very based on historical to now. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It's built into systems from way back, like slavery, segregation, immigration laws, all that stuff. So all that to say is this means that a white person will, by default, be set up to win in our system. So white supremacy serves them. So the water serves them, right? Works well. Okay. So what is white supremacy? White supremacy is basically the idea that white people are better than people of other races. So this kind of shows up in how we've set up our society. And we can see the result of that is white people in positions of power, right? Or having access to capital, all that stuff. So in comparison, this means that a non-white person will, by default, be set up to lose in our systems, right? So white supremacy kind of poisons us. And I mean that very like figuratively and literally. White supremacy is literally killing us. So in healthcare, in prisons, in deportation centers, and in the global south. Okay. I'm sure none of this has been a surprise to you. You know what white privilege is, you know what white supremacy is, right? But now, how do we actually talk about the water? So why should we talk about it? If we don't recognize our privilege, we can support the status quo, right? So again, all types of privilege, but today we're talking about white supremacy. So if white people don't recognize their privilege or white privilege, they can support the status quo. So it's not enough to just not be racist yourself. We're also counting on you to be actively anti-racist. So challenging the systems that keep white people in those positions of power and in those positions of like access to capital that other people don't get simply because of the color of their skin. So sorry. So we should talk about it because avoiding these conversations can make us complicit in oppression of, other races. We should talk about it because we don't want to be prioritizing donor comfort by avoiding conversations of race and systemic oppression. Also, our donors are mostly white and they have disproportionate influence over organizational priorities that directly impact people of color, right? So that's another reason to talk about it. And one more that kind of like personally pisses me off a little bit is nonprofits are really good at talking the talk, but not so much at walking the walk, right? So it's a little bit performative. And that's why we should talk about it, right? We don't want to fall into that ourselves as individuals. And I always love this quote by Desmond Tutu. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So That's really interesting because neutral feels like it's not a choice. It feels like, oh, by not making a choice, I'm doing something, I'm choosing to avoid causing any harm or any imbalance, right? But neutral is a choice. So this is a really good illustration of that. You've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you were neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality, right? So who does neutrality benefit? So why don't we talk about white supremacy? This is why I think, but I would love to hear your reasons as well. So I think we don't talk about it because of fear and limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs are the beliefs that hold us back from achieving our full potential. There are thoughts and assumptions that we carry about ourselves, our organizations, our donors, our community. And these beliefs actually often go unchallenged and unnoticed, but they can stem from past experiences, cultural conditioning, or even, other people's opinions. So if your board is saying, oh my goodness, we can't have that conversation, that's just, we're going to lose the gift, right? That might influence the way that you see the situation, even if it's not necessarily true. So that's kind of what I think is happening, but I'd love to hear what you think. And I would invite you to throw 3 reasons in the chat why fundraisers don't talk to donors about these topics. So what's got us all looking like a bunch of scaredy cats, right? Like what I would love to kind of hear what you're thinking. I'll go over a few different limiting beliefs that I thought of. But let's see what you got. Okay, I can't actually see the chat here. Here. Yeah, chat. Okay, awesome. Yes. Okay, yes. Right. I feel like this is like in the times where I haven't talked about it, either I felt like unsafe or I felt, like I'm causing the community to lose out or something like that. I love this. I have a temper. That's hilarious. They see conflict as harmful. Yes, it's a different, like, that's a cultural conditioning thing, right? Like, some cultures are really not about any time of conflict. Yeah, so I really resonate with all of these. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's talk about some of these, right? One that I've heard is, and I have my scaredy cats here, right? Scaring us into not doing this. But one that I heard is that donors don't want to talk about.
Yeah, I think we lost your audio for a sec, Maria. Can you?
Yes.
There, all good.
Yeah, so in my conversations with donors, feel that that's not actually accurate. So I feel donors are deeply engaging with thoughts around wealth, privilege, and oppression and how they fit into those systems. Donors, especially like the wealthier, like foundations, individual giving, even corporate, have already started having these conversations internally. So it's kind of a shame that we're not part of that conversation with them, especially in the place that we occupy. This is another one. Mission drift. I can't talk about anything except this one specific thing, right? So let's use food insecurity as an example. I can't talk about anything that isn't, providing hampers. Why are people poor? Are they, food insecure because of other reasons outside of access to wealth, right? So we know these are connected conversations, right? Social issues are interconnected and complex, and tackling multiple things at once may be exactly what we need to do for people to understand how we can't solve systemic issues piecemeal, right? So one nonprofit isn't going to solve, housing insecurity, but having these conversations allows people to understand that housing insecurity is actually connected to low incomes and low wages and social assistance rates, and like giving them a bigger picture of what you already know. They just don't have it usually, right? I think this one's a big one, especially if you're not used to having conversations around privilege. Is I need to figure out exactly everything that I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, the tonality, the actual words, so I don't say the wrong thing. this one can really like cause us to freeze up, right? The thing is, like, we all make mistakes, right? And another thing is that we all have different lived experiences. So something that I say, like, I'll give you an example later of me screwing up, but something that I say might not immediately click for me that it's an offensive term, right? But someone calling you in, that's all part of the work. It's all being in community and like making sure that we're all like helping each other along in this journey, right? So what I would say is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And also the best way to get good is to practice. So, it's impossible to kind of have that clear understanding of every single person's lived experience. So you have to be open to learning and you have to be open to not getting it right. It's just part of the process. Okay, this one. It isn't my place. It isn't the right time, right? So maybe you're not a person that experiences that's lived experience, right? Like let's say this donor doesn't understand pronouns. Oh, well, I use, cisgender pronouns. So it's not my place to educate that donor. A lot of us like to call ourselves allies, right? Especially in the sector. So I want to remind everyone, like allyship is not a one-time thing or a label to be claimed, right? It's an ongoing process of learning, listening, and taking action, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the right time because it's always the right time to be an ally, isn't it? And it's always the right time to speak up for yourself. So if this is actually directly impacting you, it's always the right time to speak up for yourself. No job is worth it, right? Um, and also, if we're going back to the idea of allyship, by publicly naming names, outing racist practices, and demanding better, allies and activists can take on the heat that marginalized people cannot afford to take, right? So whether it's due to emotional capacity, possible repercussions, or more, like the punishment will be lesser for someone who's a white person, right? So just thinking that through and like, I know there's always like a risk to doing any form of advocacy and allyship, but there is. That's what it is. That's the work, right? I think I saw this one in the chat. I or my organization will face consequences. We can't bite the hand that feeds us. For this one, I feel like I felt this way for a while, but now I have a different mentality on it. So this is a false dichotomy, right? We can and should be selective about our funding sources, and diversifying our income actually helps us do that, right? So it helps us find mission aligned funding that is so necessary for our work. So it may require a little bit more effort and creativity, but it's definitely worth it to maintain our integrity, right? And something that I want to say is it's very scary to be speaking up for what's right when it might cost you your livelihood, right? Especially at a time where the States is going like that and there's a whole bunch of other things in the world, right? So I get it. I understand. But you can't just sit in silence, right? Going back to that Desmond Tutu quote, like if you wait in silence watching what others might do, there is a cost to that. And it's usually Black and brown people paying the price. So, what are you willing to trade off to live in alignment with your values? And if it's nothing, if like I'm not even willing to be uncomfortable, then it's not necessarily a value for you, right? Okay, I've talked a lot. Maria, how do I talk to donors about white supremacy, capitalism, systemic racism, and wealth hoarding? Okay, cool. So, here are 4 steps that I use to navigate these conversations. And it's basically this: prepare yourself, us versus the problem, share stories, get help. Those are kind of the 4 main things that I want you to remember. This will kind of provide you a structure of these 4 things, but we also created a one-pager template for you to create your own script based on your specific mission and service users and the, systemic barriers that they face and your lived experience. So it's way more tailored to you, and that will be sent out with the recording as well. But for now, let's focus on understanding the like 4 main buckets. Okay, the first one is easy. Prepare yourself, right? So you really have to do a lot of like self-education. Before you talk to donors, make sure that you've schooled yourself on the issues, right? So understand how systemic racism impacts your service users and also the nonprofit world at large, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you can slowly introduce this topic. Like, you know, why do you think people are experiencing this issue? And then leading people into the right direction of why they're actually experiencing that issue, right? So if it's, for example, homelessness, and they say like, oh, because they don't work hard. Well, actually, so like guide them along, right? Educate them. And you can only do that when you're yourself educated, right? So you can have that lived experience that is a lot of like education, or you might not have it. So if you don't have that lived experience, get curious and learn. So for instance, if you're working with formerly incarcerated individuals, know the systemic barriers that they face and how racial disparities play into incarceration rates. So that way you'll feel very confident walking the walk, not just talking. Again, don't be perfect, be the enemy of the good. A lot of white people get stuck and frozen, and we just really have to say something, right? By educating ourselves and acknowledging that we will always be learning, we understand that it's more important to say something than to say nothing. And if you're afraid to start, is probably because you're afraid to fail. And that's a sign that you just gotta get your feet wet, try it out and see how it goes, right? You only learn from doing it. I also included a little bit about people pleasing. This might apply to you, it might not, but anytime that you have a fear, you can actually investigate that fear and say, like, why do I feel this way? And most of the time, it's just like assumptions, right? So I gave this example when I was talking to I think Christina about this presentation, like, oh, like I think I can't eat healthy or whatever it is, right? So why do I think that? Well, I don't have time to meal prep. Okay, well, what's the solution to that? Right? So by challenging limiting beliefs, you can actually break it down into little components that you can prepare around. So I can prepare and meal prep, right? I can do that on the weekend, whatever it is, right? Okay, so that's prepare yourself. Get all the information that you need to be able to speak confidently. Practice if you want. Sounds good. Step two, focus on mutual understanding. So again, we all have different lived experiences. We're not all going to understand the same thing, right? So focus on building that mutual lesson. So for me, I usually start with pronouns to see how a donor reacts to that. Like if they have, like if I say my pronouns are she, her, and they have no reaction and just tell me their pronouns, I assume they understand a little bit about social justice, right? Then I'll try other terms that they may or may not be familiar with. So capitalism, wealth hoarding, systemic racism, tax avoidance, white supremacy, anti-blackness, right? There's a whole bunch of different terms that you can kind of test the water with to see how familiar they are with them. If they're not familiar with them, you could use terms that they currently understand to introduce new terms. So, for example, I was working with a billionaire who all she could talk about was trust-based philanthropy. Great. You have the basics to understand community-centric fundraising, but they won't unless I introduce that to them, right? So just introduce terms and also share resources with your donors and your broader community around what you're talking about. So for example, if I'm talking about community-centric fundraising, I want them to read the hub. You know, I want them to go understand the principles. So I will actually email that directly to them after meeting with them and praise consistency in them, sorry, praise consistency. So if they want to talk about it more than once, that's great. If they are challenging what they're, you know, feeling, that's great. If they were just taking steps towards like being allies to the community you serve, that's really, really important, right? It all starts with treating people like people that are learning new concepts. Share stories. So sharing stories, we know how important stories are to getting the point across, right? We use it in our fundraising all the time. And this is just another way of doing that to explain these new concepts to people and like move them along in their educational journey, right? So for me, when I'm talking to a donor about any of these topics, like I'll use personal stories that I've been through to explain that to them. So not only have I lived in a World Vision refugee shelter and access food banks, drop-ins, whatever, so I can directly speak to that experience if I'm fundraising for one of those organizations, but also I can talk about the way that these issues show up internally at a nonprofit. So that time my ED asked me to put on an accent for a video. Or when the same ED asked me to put on a hijab for World Hijab Day, or the donor that complimented my English, the donor that gave me 50,000 after not giving for a few years after a conversation about community-centric fundraising, right? So you can really highlight the issues and the solutions in your storytelling, which is so, so key for people as they're learning new concepts and as they're being brought along into, not just being donors, but also being advocates for the organization. So highlighting stories about growth, such as acknowledging past mistakes and harm, is also really, really helpful, right? So I don't share the story very often, but I'll share with you. So I want you to kind of think like, how did you learn to unlearn? Because it's such a hard thing to kind of get your head around, I think. Like, it's just very difficult to like, how do I unlearn something when I don't even know what I'm supposed to be unlearning? Like, I have that kind of like gap in my knowledge, right? So here's how I started to learn, and I would share the story with a donor, but I had a friend, Rita. This was like, I don't know, like 15 years ago. Rita is a white person, and she posted on Facebook about why is it bad for white people to wear dreads? Like, I just like the look. I just want to wear dreads. Like, stop harassing me about it, right? And for me, I had a very similar opinion. I was like, yeah, whatever, it's just hair. But then, but then I saw Juan, who is a non-binary person, and Charlotte, who is Black, calling Rita in publicly on Facebook, right? I was like, oh my God, they're really mad. Why are they so mad? But because I deeply respected them, it made me do some research. And that's how I started to unlearn. So it was like, this doesn't make sense. There's something that doesn't quite fit right. And now that Juan and Charlotte had like put it into words, I had the terms to then do deeper learning myself. Right. So like think about how you learned, be able to share that story, and also like encourage them to think about how do they unlearn and how do they, grow and acknowledge harm and like learn from those mistakes because we're gonna make them, right? I'll give you another example, much more recently, of how to be in community with people and do the work, right? So this post, I posted it 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's stages of community-centric fundraising. So beginner, asking for donations, intermediate, talking about systemic issues, advanced, turning donors into advocates. And I had master, changing policy, right? Jaya, love her. She wrote, love this, minus the master. Is there a different term we can use? So it could be as simple as this. This is what allyship looks like. It can be just changing the word. It can be like you can Jaya knows me a little bit, so she knows my intention is not to be offensive, right? But that is being together in community, right? So find people who lift you up and hold you accountable. If not in your organization, then elsewhere. But also you can, my response, 100% I'll use pro, right? There's no like, oh my God, Jaya, I'm so sorry, blah, 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 right? Like it's just, got it, makes sense. So it's a great, easy call in. You take it on the chin and you learn from it. Step 4, last step, get help. So you're going to bump into people who don't get it, unfortunately, right? And you have a few options. So if they don't get it and they want to get it, they want to learn, that I would encourage doing donor education around. So like talking to them about the problems of, discouraging overhead or whatever it is, right? If they don't get it and don't want to get it and are continuing to be problematic or offensive or, just harmful to your community, then you can end the relationship. That's something that you're allowed to do, right? You don't need to, continue to jump hoops and like sidestep their behavior. Like you are the fundraiser, you're the person that has to work with this person permanently. And if it wouldn't be okay for a staff person or a volunteer to be using those, to be expressing those views, then why is it okay for a donor? And for me, like I really want to make sure that if I introduce this donor to a program staff person to tell them about the work, that they're not going to say something that's going to be so harmful to the people who do the work every single day, right? So really think about how you want to address those things before they happen, right? So as an ally, you can use your privilege to address these systemic issues. And that really, really helps for people who are not white. Um, so they don't have to do the emotional labor every single time. Like even thinking back to an example that I gave earlier of a donor complimenting my English. This person had been in nonprofit for like 40 years as a donor, and she complimented my English, and no, I guess fundraiser had talked to her about some of these things beforehand. And at that time, I'm sad to say that I didn't say anything either because it's like I'm a racialized person. I'm not really sure what to say. Like I wasn't prepared, right? So there's like ways to actually like think through these situations, prepare yourself so you are ready for these scenarios, whether you have that lived experience or not. So basically, treat them like people who care deeply about the cause and want to make a difference in the world, but through systemic means as well as nonprofit. So you don't need to avoid these chats. I bet your donors are already thinking about this already. So why does this work? So transparency, right? So directly addressing systemic issues without downplaying the donor's existing support can really help the donor understand their role in the system. So for me, it would be like, hey, we're fundraising to, feed people. Why are people hungry? It's because they are on social assistance rates that are decided at the provincial level, right? So I'm already introducing by using my service user as an entry point to the conversation. I'm introducing the idea of systemic barriers. So provincial government is not increasing social assistance rates. Like, why is that? And then what role does the donor play in subsidizing poor government policy? And what role do I play in subsidizing poor government policy, right? So having those conversations and saying like, oh my goodness, like we're both kind of part of the problem, but we still need to feed people, right? So there's the short-term goal and the long-term goal. And I can only get to my long-term goal if you're educated and you're voting right and you're telling people about how to, engage in this work, and all that good stuff, right? So transparency is really good. Um, Action oriented. So it positions the donor as an ally in pushing for systemic change, not just in, giving me money and feeling good about the work that we're currently doing, which is amazing. Like everyone's doing amazing work and everyone's funding amazing work. But still those issues persist, right? So whether I give 100 hampers or 1,000 or 100,000, people are still experiencing those barriers. And this isn't the solution to a systemic issue. It's a solution to an effect of a systemic issue, but like really engaging them in being active participants in the fight for justice, not just, oh, thank you for your gift and maybe I'll see you later, right? So treating them like partners as well. And I like this word partner because like the conversations that you have with your partners are always like based on trust, based on respect, based on, trying to get on the same page, us versus the problem. It's not, you know, it's okay, they said something weird and whatever, right? Like you actually care about your partner. You want them to be successful in their journey towards, whatever it is that they're doing. And that's kind of what I want you to do. Like I want you to see this donor not as an ATM machine, not as an overlord, but as a partner. You're on equal footing. So you can say no. You could say that's not right. You could say, I don't want to talk to you ever again in my life, right? Like you have a lot of agency in the situation, especially as a fundraiser. Organizations see you as having the purse strings, right? So you have more safety than practically any other person at the organization to have these conversations. And going back to like, if you're not willing to lose anything, how is it a value? Like if you're not willing to even be uncomfortable, how is it a value, right? Another reason why this works is because you're inviting the donor to engage. So I don't just jump into the word white supremacy because I don't know if they understand that. I don't want them to feel, defensive or hurt simply because they didn't have the knowledge to actually ingest what I'm saying, right? So like go slow, like try something like pronouns or systemic racism and see what they understand before you kind of like throw them into the deep end, right? So like really get their consent as you go along. And this does not mean ask a donor if you can talk to them about systemic issues, okay? They don't even understand what that question means. So, you know, use the systemic issues that your organization or your service users or you yourself face to invite this person to deeper understanding. Education, so it's like very contextual. It connects white supremacy and capitalism to your issue that they already care about without overwhelming the donor, right? Also, without overwhelming you. It's just small bits and you can prepare as things go along, right? Safety for fundraisers. So, yeah, like you can decide whether you continue to be in relationship with that person because maybe they are not the right partner for your organization, or maybe they are, they just need that donor education. So if they don't understand, like, why is asking you to put on an accent for our video problematic, you could tap in a peer. You could tap in another fundraiser, you could tap in your ED, you could tap in a board member, a different organizational fundraiser, or you know what, like just get a consultant to come in and be like, this is why we're doing this, right? There's a lot of people that you can tap in, so you don't have to figure it out alone. And in fact, with that example that I gave earlier, I'm hoping that you don't. I hope that you find community inside or outside your organization to really help you with the conversations, but also with the holding yourself accountable to learning and unlearning. So that gives us some time for questions and conversations. So I'm really excited to hear what you're thinking. As I said, we're gonna have that one pager for you to fill out as you go along with your own cause. But I'd love to hear kind of like, what are you thinking? Like, how have you had these conversations in the past before? How have they gone? And are there any challenges that I didn't cover during the limiting beliefs that you want to talk about? And I hope there are some because I'm sure there's other people in the room who have the same kind of latency. So if there's anything, I'd love to hear it. And I see there's stuff in the chat. You get the English compliment all the time. Articulate. So I'll stop sharing and then we can have a conversation and be a little bit more in community. If you want to share your camera as well and unmute yourself, I'd love to kind of continue the conversation. Hey, go for it. Has anyone had that conversation with donors yet at all about any form of privilege?
I'll just share that uh, serving the transgender community, there's a lot of conversations about cis privilege versus trans privilege. Um, Not as much that I have addressed on the racism piece, but certainly it's there.
And are a lot of your donors cis or trans?
No, so we work primarily with youth, so the
Mhm.
majority of our donors are like cis parents, grandparents, that kind of stuff. Mostly cis straight white folks.
And does your organization do any like education or how does that work?
We have not yet. We've only had a development manager for, I don't know, about, I don't know, Jasmine's on this call. I think it's been almost a year. So finally getting ourselves, it is almost a year. Okay, so finally getting ourselves kind of in the set organized sort of thing. I'll just like super shout out in the first quarter, Jasmine increased our monthly donors by 33%. Rock on.
Nice.
We love to have those kinds of successes. So this is like the next layer, and we really have to start with our board on the whole white supremacy conversation, I think, and make sure that, team wise, so board and staff wise, we're all on the same page before we can really, I think, with integrity, dive into the donors.
You know what's funny? At my past organization, my board did not get it at all. Like they were so out to lunch, and my donors got it way more than my board. Like my donors were thinking about like their source of wealth, and we were talking about their taxes and like CCF and trust-based philanthropy, all that stuff, as if they were like 5 to 10 years deeper into their learning journey than my board. So I don't know if that will be the same for you, but just a heads up, like sometimes like you wanna bring them in later because you've already convinced all your major donors. Haha. Care about equity, you know? Thanks, Christina, for throwing that. It's a one pager in the chat. We'll also email it to you, but just so you know that it's there. What about other organizations? Has anyone else tried having these conversations? And if you haven't, is there a reason why?
Hi, my name's
Hi.
Luke.
Oh, there you go. I can't stand silence. Do it, William.
Oh, okay. Um, I'm from Love for Humanity. The way we've dealt with these concerns is we come from a spiritual sense of that I am the soul. Um, so it's the thing that connects everyone, and we don't really look at, I mean, we whatever you want to declare that you are is fine. It's just that on a basis level that we're all the soul. So we're very diverse, and there's never been any issues that have come up because we always come from that lowest state. So it's never been an issue. So it's a spiritual connection that we come from. But I haven't had conversations with billionaires that have tremendous amount of money and power, and so I can't speak to that issue. But that's how we addressed it.
So is your community like mostly homogenous or like are there different types of people? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's completely diverse. There's no, I don't really see much race problems. It's basically the community's been people that are attracted to the work to do spiritual work. So um, we don't have any discrimination about anything or sexuality. It's not an issue. So um, but from that sense, like dealing with rich donors, um, I haven't really addressed that. So it's always based on the spirituality connection between everyone, that we are all souls, and the body's what it is, like it's all good, So
Yeah.
that's that's
It's
how we
good
address it. So it's not an issue.
It's good to hear that there's like no interpersonal issues and no one's being actively harmful at your organization. That sounds really good. It's it does give me a little bit of pause though, because like they must experience racism outside of your, four walls, right? Because it is very systemic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is the study of like trying to reach people. Like if I look at someone as their body as who they are, as opposed to what my spiritual teachings have shown me, that they're the soul, and that's what they always talk about, the eternal, that you live forever, right? So like that part of you is what we speak to. So like I try not to look at the shell that it houses this spiritual person or spiritual being. So the different, so that's kind of a side note, and like not to make a big deal out of it. It's just that's who we are, like it's who you are now. And I look at the spiritual essence of the person. So that I'm able to connect with more people, because it's not like, oh, I can't talk to you because of this or whatever. Even if you're a terrible, mean person, a lot of times you can reach them. Well, I have reached a lot of people through just looking at their soul. I I hope that's not too esoteric, but
Jasmine, did you have a question or you want to chime in?
I just wanted to chime in because I think what the cool part about seminars like this and just like your work in general, I think is kind of like expanding what we view as the definition of like racism, discrimination, transphobia, whatever the genre is that we're talking about, to like more of a broader, not just like systemic view, but also like even the best like intentions from somebody, even if like consciously some people may not view like, you know, themselves as being X, Y, and Z. I think it's important to remember just like in general, specifically like from the stuff that you said and just like doing broader diversity work as well, that like recognizing somebody and who they are and celebrating that is just as important as you know, not actively harming somebody. And so I think like what I really liked about this was just kind of reaffirming that of like, oh, yes, we are obviously exist in systemic systems that make life harder for some and then better for others. And I think just like reminding each other to like celebrate each other as well, it can be a form of anti-racism that we don't talk about a lot.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Hi, Maria. Just wanted to say thank you for this great session and share a little bit about the organization that I work for and our journey. I'm with the San Diego Food System Alliance, and we've been centering conversations about race and equity in our work essentially from the start. So we're very fortunate to kind of have developed relationships with foundations that are really aligned with that vision. Something that we are experiencing now, as we're being pretty hard hit by federal funding freezes because our work is so focused on equity. So something we're running into is trying to ask those funders to step up. I'm curious, like, especially because with foundations, right, they're typically spending 5% of their endowment. Like this is like the rainy day that they've been waiting for. This is like it's pouring, it's hailing right now, and it doesn't really feel like the reaction has been from funders has been meeting that urgency. So I guess I'm curious, like what you found as maybe some successful messaging or like what your experience has been maybe with some of these foundations that could be stepping up in this moment and seem to have been allies, but the action isn't quite there. Yeah, curious if you have any
I have
reflections on that.
I have a super hot tip for you, okay?
Okay.
Speak to their donor identity. That psychology trick. So you say like, you know, some people are taking this opportunity to like run and hide and stick their head in the sand and are abandoning the community. Ew, horrible. We hate those people. But some donors have really stepped up. Some have doubled, tripled their giving to us. Right? So like people are seeing that this is an emergency. They have this rainy day fund. Today is a rainy day, right? Which group are you? They automatically will choose which group they're in, right? And again, like if they're like, oh no, I want to stick my head in the sand. I don't know if you're the right partner for me. I need like people willing to risk things right now, you know, because we're at risk. But if you speak to like other people or blah, 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 they'll put themselves in this bucket.
Mhm.
And then you can start playing with the like amount. So like I would love if you gave me $5 million, but I'll settle for one, right? Like whatever they're giving you, like times 10, but I'll settle for like 2 or 3 times what it is. Like it's time to go.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
No worries. Okay, so and no, okay, that's enter the waiting room. Okay, so I have the handout. Fill it out. Let me know if you have any issues or any questions once you've done that. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation. There's also like the podcast and some other resources that I have out there in case you're looking for extra support. But I think we'll leave it there and I'll hand it back over to Christina. But just know that if there's anything, you can reach out. And I really appreciate everyone being here and contributing to the conversation too. I know it's not always easy.
Thanks, Maria, for guiding us through this sometimes hard, difficult. We need a lot of courage to have these conversations, so we appreciate you um, just like naming it so well. And we will share the recording for this call, the script, and the slides that you saw today. And you'll get that in a follow-up email. Please take a minute to respond to our session evaluation. I just dropped it in the chat. And also register for our upcoming training. I'm also going to drop the registration link here. So I actually saw Laura, one of our upcoming trainers. I'm not sure if she's still in the call here. But our next session is May 6th from 10 to 11 Pacific. Please register for that. Our next training is about values-based fundraising, so don't miss that one. And we'll see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks again, Maria. We love you. Thank you for everything you're doing. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.